let's first talk about MMA media and what they've been doing lately. You saw them trying to bait Sean Strickland, and now they were trying to get good old Dana White. They were trying to get him, to say, hey, are you going to do anything about the way Sean Strickland speaks about reporters or speaks about the public, and just his views could be, I don't know, intimidating. They could be scary. And are you going to do something about it? Do you pull him to the side? Do you say, hey, you know what? You got to tone it down a bit? Are those things that we see in the UFC or that we don't see that are happening behind the scenes? I start off with this clip of Dana White, and he's being asked by a reporter, a somewhat baity question. Let's see what Dana White had to say. Here we go.
You obviously give a long leash to your fighters about, what they can say.
That was already a mistake. You give him a long leash. Look at Dana's face. He's like, oh, God, here it comes. I'm sure he foresaw this happening at one point in the post-fight press conference. But nonetheless, the reporter, you gave your fighters a long leash. Kind of a dumb question already, right? Like, what kind of leash does Dana White put on his fighters? But as far as fighters saying whatever they want, I have yet to see Dana White try to put a quote-unquote leash on them. The response of Dana White.
When they are up there with the UFC microphone and you are getting into territory of homophobia, transphobia, like, is there...
I don't give anybody a leash.
Well, there you go. I don't give anyone he's already bothered. Here we go.
Well, I'm saying you...
A leash?
I'm like...
Free speech. Control what people say. Gonna tell people what to believe. Gonna tell people... I don't fucking tell any other human being what to say.
Good point that you brought up, Eddie Rodriguez. He writes, Canadian media being weirdos. Is it Canadian media, or you think this would have been asked in America, in any state? Maybe perhaps it would be asked in New York, but maybe not so much in Texas or something like that, right? Do you think it was a Canadian problem where they were so focused on that, or if it's just because Sean Strickland, or a little bit of both?
And there's no leashes on any of them. What is your question?
I was asking that question. I'll move on, though.
Yeah, probably a good idea. That's ridiculous to say I give somebody a leash. Free speech, brother. People can say whatever they want, and they can believe whatever they want.
You could tell he's bothered by the question being asked by the reporter, as far as him having a leash on the reporter or on his fighters. And Dana White doubles down kind of with what Sean Strickland, as far as freedom of speech. He should be able to say what he wants, and if you disagree with it, oh well. And a point that we've made on previous videos, and I think it's important to bring up again, but you don't see this in any other sport. Again, if you guys are longtime fans of sports and not just MMA in general, if you follow basketball, if you follow baseball, football, in any other sport, that being baseball, basketball, football, and all the popular sports, even golf, I'm sure. If you say something that the corporation, the organization that you're playing for doesn't like, whether it be the NBA, the NFL, MLB, there's going to be a fine. There's going to be repercussions. I'm sure they probably even pull you to the side, send you into the principal's office, and they tell you, hey, you know what? You got to chill out on that. Next fine will be bigger, or next time you'll be suspended. And the list goes on the repercussions or the consequences that we see from saying things that the company generally or genuinely doesn't like. Now, Dana White, it is refreshing. Dana Blanco, we got to give him credit. At least in the UFC, it appears you can say whatever you want. And is that just a little bit biased, or is that favorited, or is there favoritism because Sean Strickland has a following? I don't think so, because I think one of the best examples that we can bring up, as far as no matter how famous or low on the totem pole as far as a fighter you are, you can apparently say what you want. And one of the examples that comes to mind is Manel Cape. You remember when he said the F word, and not the one that not the 4-letter word, but the 6-letter one, right? The one that Sean Strickland frequently uses. Manel said it in a post-fight interview, and there were no repercussions for him as well either. Now Sean Strickland, with everything he's saying about freedom of speech, about gender, about the LGBTQ community, the list goes on. Sean Strickland has just been firing off and saying whatever you want. Do you think they were trying to, maybe not the UFC, but maybe the Canadian government and Canada in general, do you think they were trying to stop the press conference early because of things that Sean Strickland was saying already? A soft spot, a weak spot for conspiracy theories. And Maybe they were going to end that press conference early regardless. I don't know. Maybe you guys could tell me in the comments. Jesus says, if free speech gets out of hand, does ESPN think about resigning with the UFC? Good question. I do think the UFC has made it just their success with global marketing and appearance. I do think that the ESPN loses if they choose to let the UFC go, because if the UFC at this point wants to do their own pay-per-view format and get it out to almost any country, I do think they have the muscle, the power, the money in order to be able to do so. So I do think it's a pretty complicated question if free speech gets out of hand, so to speak, if you could even say that. Perhaps the ESPN doesn't resign with the UFC. What if another question I could ask you as well too, what if the UFC should just look elsewhere anyways? Should they try to get along with other competitors? I know Showtime is out the picture, but what about if it was someone like Fox that does their pay-per-views, or I'm sure ABC or CNBC, and those companies might not. But it is an interesting topic as far as what can be done if the ESPN chooses to not re-sign with the UFC. And I think it'll hurt them more than it'll hurt the UFC, in my opinion. Rodriguez says, you don't need to cut promos in other sports. That's true. This kind of stuff sells fights. Since the beginning of time, right? Fight sports, and maybe you could even say racial conversations, and in boxing especially, like, you've always seen things like that, right? UFC will probably 10x as a business in these times. I think they're doing quite well. Remember, they were one of the only ones that stayed open during the pandemic, and that did wonders for them. So we'll see what else happens, but I think they're doing quite all right.